Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 110 of the Game Changers. I'm your host Carla, and tonight I'm turning up the heat with none than Jorge. Jorge, welcome to the show tonight. So Jorge doesn't just know the game. He reads the plays before they happen, and I'm about to pull back the curtains on the game behind the game. Big love to the TSA team for fueling this mission of amplifying voices and sparking ideas. This show exists because of visionaries like them and listeners like you. If you want fantasy football gold, perspective shifting stories, or a fresh way to see the world, you're in the right place. The Game Changers isn't just a podcast, it's a movement. Let's get into it. Before I get started, I just learned from the FSWA that we have new Hall of Famers. So I want to have and I want to shout out a big congratulations for Liz Loza, for James Einsberg, and for Scott Fish himself. Congratulations to the FSWA Hall of Fame class of 2026. We are so proud of you, especially of you, Scott Fish. Congratulations. So, who is Jorge Edwards? Tonight, I'm bringing on someone who doesn't just play fantasy football. He elevates the way the entire community thinks about it. Jorge Edwards is the founder and lead strategist behind Fantasy in Frames, a brand known for blending smart strategy, analytics, and real world process thinking into content that actually helps managers win. Since 2017, Jorge has been one of the clearest voices in the space, teaching players not just what decisions to make, but why those decisions matter. With a background in biological research, he approaches fantasy football the same way he approaches science, with structure, data, and repeatable frameworks that cut through noise and create clarity. In the industry, Jorge is a recurring panelist and sponsor of the IDP panel at the Fantasy Football Expo, where he's helped push defensive strategy into the spotlight and expand the visibility of IDP formats year after year. Under his leadership, Fantasy in Frames has grown into the collaborative platform, rankings, podcasts, contributors, and a community built around actionable, logical, and accessible analysis. Jorge isn't just buzz, he's not chasing the buzz, he's building systems, and those systems help fantasy managers make better decisions every single week. Please help welcome to the Game Changers, Jorge Edwards. Jorge, how are you tonight?
Wow, that was a amazing introduction. Thank you. I am doing well. I am very excited to be on here tonight, Carla. I'm a huge fan. I'm glad we got to meet at the expo last year, and I just love everything you do here. And like I said, I'm really excited to be on the show tonight.
My microphone is muted, so I don't know if you heard anything that I just said.
Nope.
So,
I hope it was good. But I missed.
JC, did you hear everything I just said? So everything was going on good. So let's keep going. I don't know what happened, what my why my mic was muted, but let's keep going. Jorge, I'm so excited. I'm so honored to have you tonight on the show. So thank you for making this happen. 100%. Tell me, let's talk, about a little bit of origins and philosophy that you had from becoming fantasy analyzers. What moment in 2017 made you decide that fantasy analysis would be your long game, not just a hobby?
That is a great question. So I will take it back to 2016 actually, where the seed was
Wow.
planted by my wife. It was our honeymoon in the fall, and I whenever we were driving, for our honeymoon somewhere, I'd always have fantasy football podcasts playing. And throughout the year, whenever we go on trips or something, it's always fantasy football this, we're talking about fantasy football that. And it was around July of 2017 that she subtly said, hey, maybe you should have like a website and a podcast and start talking about it with, uh,
Nice.
and she gave me the idea to do that. And she came up with the name Fantasy and Frames. And so she was very much influential in getting me started. And then from there, I just did a couple articles a week. I tested the waters. I had fun with it. The following year, I started doing a podcast with one of my buddies, Ken. And next thing you know, Bob Lung invites me to the Fantasy Football Expo. I get an email one day from somebody who's like, "Oh, I listened to your podcast. I was wondering if you have any
Nice.
things." And the rest is kind of history. It just has taken off from there. And like as you said, I just really have a passion for fantasy football and just talking shop and helping to give advice and interacting with everybody and making friends like you and I. And so it's just been a
Nice.
fun process since 2017.
I love this. I really love it. How did your background in biology, like you did biological research, not just
Right.
biology, shape the first framework you built in fantasy in frames?
So one of the things I find really important when giving advice is I am not a hot take person. I will not be one of those people who's like, you should do this without any like backup research or information. So I'm really big on like, okay, what has been consistent from year to year in terms of trying to predict performance, whether it's good or bad performance. And once you have like your recipe ready to go, like you don't need to change it. You don't need to add any salt. You don't need to add any pepper. It's there. It's good to go. And it's people like to refer to it as their process, right? And so they have their process that's helped them be successful in giving advice. And so always a huge proponent of that. Being somebody who's been in research, biological research for my entire career. Repeatability is important. So you want to make sure your process is giving you the same results year in and year out. Using data, using numbers, trying to figure out where the hidden advantages are at. Very big on just having a process and being consistent with it year in, year out.
What's the single belief about fantasy decision making you would like to retire forever, Jorge?
Fantasy decision making is all about really consistency. You really want
Yes.
to hammer home, the key things that make every position in fantasy football important. There's so many numbers out there. There's so many opinions out there, but it's really when you dig deep and you find the ones that are stick. The stickiness of a statistic from year to year. What I'm not reinventing the wheel here by saying volume is king in fantasy football, but I think it's important for me to really hammer home the fact that it's important to know the why behind something versus just being told or telling people that you should do this. And immediately, what is everybody's response is why? Well, I don't think a lot of places do that. And it's really about the teaching aspect of what goes on in making these decisions. So, if anything, I was going to leave somebody with is always ask why. Never just take it face value.
Nice. I love that. Which early mistake taught you more than any success did?
So when I first started my website, I was on this platform called Blogger, which
Yes.
was free to start. I don't know if it's still around to this day, but it was a free website, very basic, but you could put your stuff out there. And one of the things when I reached out to some people in the fantasy space that I had looked up to for years. I listened to their podcast for years, and I emailed them, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm starting a site. I'm putting out articles. And can I get some advice?" And they messaged me a couple days later, and they said to me, "So we noticed that you'll put out an article on a Wednesday, but then you'll put one out on a Thursday, and so there was no like consistency in terms of when I was putting stuff out, and that led to decreased viewership." So the biggest failure was not having consistency when you put something out. And one of the best lessons I learned from that was you know if you're going to do something, do one thing really, really good, be consistent at it so that every Tuesday at 9 p.m., your followers know, you know, Carla or Jorge or insert anybody is putting out content at this time
Yes,
of day. So I can count on it being there. And I think learning from that mistake has gone a long way in kind of setting standards and examples of how to maintain success.
I love that. I love it. Jorge, walk us through a three-step decision framework you use when evaluating a mid-season trade.
So first of all, you have to look at, and I'm glad you brought up this question because I do cover offense and IDP, so I do both, and so this is really a good situation to explain this, and that is you have to look at where the value is for both sides. You can't just throw out a trade that's completely one sided because nobody's going to accept that. So one of the things you want to look at is when making a trade, am I weak at running back, but really good at wide receiver? And then is the person I'm trying to trade with dealing with the opposite? Therefore we have common ground. You want to definitely look at, then, are these players getting ample opportunity? You want to look at the players' opportunity, whether or not they're the number one running back or they're solid as the number two wide receiver, so on and so forth. So you want to find common ground,
Yes,
and that you're both having some upside there. And then as long as both players are having similar opportunities, just at different positions, then a trade is viable. Then you can pull the trigger on a trade and say, okay, let's do this. This helps us both out for different reasons. Both players have upside, and then you make the trade. You make the trade, and both your teams get better. And then it's just a matter of, at the end of the day, hopefully you both meet in the finals in the championship game, and it comes down to, all right, let's see which player did better, and that's the thrill of playing fantasy football.
yeah. And what's your process for turning raw data into a ranking or recommendation?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the important things, when it comes to recommendations is if you're going to put your name on something, if you're going to say this player is going to do well, you have to have supporting information. You have to, like, for example, on offense, for a
Yes,
running back, are they getting plenty of attempts? Are they splitting the backfield? Are they, having a lot of red zone opportunities? For a wide receiver, are their efficiency metrics consistent? Are they getting consistent over a period of time? Another big thing that's important is a lot of people, they tend to look at season long data versus looking at them in segments. And I think it's important to not ignore season long data, but it's also important to see who's trending in the right direction, who's trending up, who's trending down, and you kind of look at that from that perspective. So that goes a long way into helping to figure out, like, who are you ranking higher this week or that week. And as far as, like, recommendations, again, all we can do is look at the opportunity, who's getting the volume, who's making the most of that opportunity, and who's efficient with those opportunities when given that scenario. So those are probably the step by steps as far as how I go about giving rankings or giving advice on players to play or sit.
For you, Jorge, what's a repeatable checklist you use before publishing a ranking update?
Well, first, I like to go through all the players, make sure I'm not missing any, because that would be super embarrassing, right? So,
Yes.
yeah, that's always a good one. I want to make sure that I'm taking out the right players who are on bye. That also is a big one. But for me, it comes down to, the checklist comes down to looking at who is, again, performing well and who's trending in the right direction. I am not a huge proponent of stating, well, this person has a very popular name and they're used to doing, so well at this or so poorly at that. It's all about, like, well, what are they doing now? How have they been doing things the past few weeks? Are they increasing, their value? Are they decreasing their value? And then you just kind of adjust accordingly. I'm not a big person who it comes to name value per se. It's more of like a what have you done for me lately type of scenario, and whether or
Yes.
not you anticipate that getting better or getting worse going forward.
I love this idea. I want to talk. I want you to take us a little bit about how it all started, though. How did you start? And how did you find out about fantasy football? what drew you to it, and we can talk a little bit about the expo after. So, what drew you to fantasy football, and how did you start?
So that's a funny question. So one of my oldest friends, he had a fantasy football league starting. I think they started back in 2003, 2004, and I started playing in 2008 because one of his longtime managers left the league, and they're like, Jorge, do you want to play in the league? And I'm like, sure. And I knew nothing about fantasy football. I was asking my friends, like, hey, is this good? Does this player, does he score a lot of points? Do I want this player? And so, my roster was subpar, but I had Tim Tebow as my quarterback, and he had one really good year fantasy wise for the Denver Broncos, and he actually led me to like the championship game. So I got really lucky my first
Yeah.
year, and so then I was like, okay, well, this is fun. Let me see what happens when I can do this again. And so I really got into it. When it comes to podcasts, that really took things to the next level for me. Like I was a huge NFL fantasy podcast with James Coe and Marcus Grant and insert every other name that I'm Matt Harmon. Those were Matt Franciscovich. Like those were individuals that I really looked up to. Adam Rank, all these people formerly from NFL Network, NFL Fantasy. And then of course, fell into listening to Matthew Berry
Oh
and the
yeah.
06010 crew. So just it just started to consume me, and I started to love it and gain more from it. And most importantly, all these people that I would listen to really influenced me because I was learning the why. They were very good about teaching why somebody is important and breaking it down that way. And I think I've adopted a lot of my thought processes of how I approach content from those people to this day.
I love that. And why the expo? How did you start with the expo? And like we've met last year at the expo,
Right.
and I believe it was the first time that we've met. Like we sat and we spoke at least.
Right. Yes. So it was, I started in 2017, and then 2018, I started doing, year round content. And then
Yes.
2019, Bob Lung was starting it was at the time called the Midwest Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio. And he emailed me and he said, hey, I've been noticing, your work on Twitter. It's really impressive. Would you want to be a presenter at the expo? And I
Yeah.
said, sure, okay. This is a big opportunity. And he told me about the Kings Classic draft, and he told me about the importance of that. And so I was super excited. I got the opportunity to meet people that I've been looking up to for so many years. Not to mention, I get to promote my platform. So I was head over heels. And so, with the exception, I want to say of a couple of years ago, I forget the year exactly. I think it was 23. I've been to every expo. I've sponsored the IDP panel there every year. So I find it's a huge opportunity just to make one friends in the industry, meet people that you're so used to seeing in front of a
Yes.
camera, but not in person. Um, and one of the things that I've really prided myself on is that it seems every year we attend, meaning Fantasy and Frames crew, we always end up with like one or two people who joins Fantasy and Frames because they're interested in content. So for me, it's
Same.
there are multiple reasons to go. One, it's just fun. One, it's two, just talking to people. And sometimes, even though it's called the Fantasy Football Expo, for a lot of the content creators, we barely talk about fantasy. It's like, so how's your kid doing? How's this going? And it's just like
Right.
talking to people like they're just people. Shocking, right? Um,
Yes.
but for me, as a brand owner, at the same time, I treat it also as a good networking opportunity, and it's a good way to get my brand out there and to make sure that people give us an opportunity to help them win fantasy championships and to have fun playing fantasy football. So there are a number of reasons why I keep going, and I love going. I'll always be appreciative to Bob Lung for giving me the initial opportunity, and I will always be pro. You need to go to the expo.
I love that. I love that. Like a lot of people go to the expo every single year and they get to meet up like face to face because behind the camera is totally different than face to face. And what can you tell people, especially that the expo is coming earlier this year? What can you tell people about the expo that you're gonna like make them want to go?
So being this is from personal experience.
Yes,
I know a lot of people, they end up not being able to go because it's around the time of year. If they have children, that's when schools start back up, and
yes,
parents are getting ready. Like my wife, she has never been able to attend an expo because she's a elementary school teacher, and so like her school is starting right around expo time, and she can't take off the time. So for me personally, I'm excited that they're moving it up because it gives, families who may be wanting to attend the expo, more opportunity to have that. With the timing of it, giving more opportunity to arrive. This will be the first year my wife will be able to go to the expo, so she's
nice.
excited. A couple of the other fantasy and frames individuals, they're bringing their spouses and significant others, and so um, if anything, I'm excited to share this with her, especially she helped create this process for me to begin with, and then with all the time I spent with individuals talking about being in the fantasy space with her, I'm like, oh, so Carla put out a good show about this the other day and had this guest on, or insert somebody else. It's like putting meeting these people. I think my wife is super excited about, and I'm excited about it. So it's great to be able to share this with somebody. And I think a lot of people out there, if you're listening and watching, like this is a great opportunity to share that too, if you're able to.
I agree 100%. I cannot wait to meet up with your spouse as well at the expo. So please make it happen so we can meet up and talk to each other at some point. Um, so a lot of people have a lot of misconception. We're gonna go to IDP a little bit.
Sure.
They do have a lot of misconception about IDP. And we both know that there's the godfather of IDP, and we both know who that is.
Oh yeah.
But you're gonna tell me, Jorge, what's the biggest misconception about IDP formats that you encounter personally?
It's hard. I don't know the players. A lot of people will tell you after this past Super Bowl with New England and Seattle that there wasn't enough scoring, it wasn't fun, it was pretty boring. For me, and I'm sure for a lot of people out there in the IDP world, I was having a blast because all these players who are making interceptions and sacks and touchdowns. Like I'm like, I know that person, I know that person. That's helped me win a fantasy championship. He's helped me win a fantasy championship, and so it gives me a lot of appreciation on the other side of the ball. You go back a few seasons when it was the Rams and the Bengals in the Super Bowl, and everyone remembers Cooper Kupp scoring that touchdown to put the Rams ahead of the Bengals. But people forget it was Aaron Donald that helped win that Super Bowl by sacking Joe Burrow to end the game. So I think, one of the common misconceptions is that defense doesn't matter in fantasy football. When it has the potential to if you play IDP. There's not that many more names you have to learn. You're seeing every week now, more or less, the necessity of
Yes,
learning these players' names because defensive players are becoming more and more recognized for their play on the football field. Like you hear certain Bobby Wagner, you hear insert another defensive player. You turn on your TV, you turn on Sunday Night Football or Monday Night Football, and somebody made an interception, and you're just like, who is that player? They keep making interceptions, or who is that player? They keep getting all these tackles, or who is that player? They keep sacking my quarterback, and I want them to stop. Eventually the names start imprinting in your head, and being able to translate that into like, so I can have these really good players on defense on my fantasy team, and they can help me
yes.
win. Yeah, like let's do it. Let's get these players involved. Let's find more ways to win. For people who are, I like fantasy because I like scoring points. You can score some points with your IDP players. So
True.
the common misconception is that there's just too many names and it's too hard. And if anything, it's further from the truth.
You're talking about defensive players.
Yeah.
What's your approach to drafting defensive players in mixed leagues?
I am glad you brought that up because we're doing a series over at Fantasy Frames just talking about this very thing. And that is, IDP, and you had Steve Hungarter on a couple months ago, who's just a phenomenal name in the fantasy space. He just works so hard in IDP.
Yes.
And one of the things I remember from your all's show was that there are different types of scoring when it comes to IDP. So you really have to take into consideration like what your scoring is, because depending on that, it could make linebackers more valuable. It could make, depending on your different scoring settings, it could make your defensive lineman more valuable. So once you figure out who are the players that are going to be more valuable, now you have them in your combo leagues, right? And so you try to look at, where am I getting value, just like you would at any other position. So when it comes to drafting players, you know, opportunity leans towards more the offensive side of the ball. So I generally advise getting your offensive players first, meaning your starting roster filled out. And then once that's done, target the players on IDP that, based off your scoring settings, are going to give you the most upside, and just go from there. And then once you get your starting IDP roster, now you can go back and forth, because, you know, I would rather have, after I get my starting roster set, I would rather have elite IDP players than worry about a wide receiver 4 or 5 who may never see the field, but I'm drafting because, well, if there's an injury, and if this happens, or if that happens, like, there's so many like ifs, right? Versus an
Yes.
IDP player where I'm like, oh, I know, I know that
Yeah.
they're going to have production. I know they're going to get me fantasy points. So definitely, after you get your starting roster on offense filled, boom, attack the IDPs.
And Jorge, how do you teach managers to spot defensive sleepers before the market does?
So that's a great question. So, like, for example, there are certain like advanced metrics, that people like to look at for IDP, that helps them, build their IDP framework in terms of their analysis. And let me give you a good idea. Like, let's talk about like defensive linemen. So one really good metric that people like to look at, specifically IDP analysts, is pressure rate. So how often are they getting to the quarterback? How often are they making the quarterback feel uncomfortable to the point that they take a sack, or they scramble, or the quarterback just gets so discombobulated, like they don't know what to do, and they make a mistake. They throw an interception. So many different things could go in that direction. So finding a sleeper, for example, a defensive lineman, is okay. Well, this defensive lineman has a really high pressure rate, but the sacks aren't there. Meaning, he is this close to getting you a sack, this close to getting, but for some reason it's just not happening. But he's this close. I would rather put my faith in a player that is this close a lot of the time, versus a player who may get you a sack here, a sack there, a sack there, but there's no consistency at all. And so by finding those players who get the opportunity, I'd rather, those are the players that I would want to go after as far as sleepers go, because eventually they're going to get home more often than not.
I agree. I agree. So, what's a trade off unique to IDP that offensive fantasy managers rarely face?
Um, so are you referring to like how like IDP managers, they uh, like, in terms of like the value or the position, like what somebody like for an IDP that helps?
Whatever you want to share, it's
Yeah,
fine. Yes,
yeah,
go ahead.
sure. So something that they really face is, well, something that they really face is scarcity at certain positions. Like, for
Yes.
example, it is very easy to replace a linebacker in fantasy football, right? But it is very difficult to replace a running back in fantasy football, right? Like your true number one running backs, like there's a handful of them, and then you get into like your RB2s and threes and fours. Whereas linebacker, the productivity you get from like the first 24, you may find, at the top 36, so you can find replacements at linebacker that you maybe not cannot find at other positions on offense. Conversely, defensive linemen in IDP fantasy football, there's like a handful of consistent ones you can count on from week in and week out. And then from there, it takes a drastic decline. So you want to get those players, those defensive linemen first in your leagues. And then you can attack, like, for example, wide receiver, because wide receiver is another position where you can find value later on in your draft. So It varies from position to position, but you can definitely take advantage of those the position scarcity in that regard.
And tell me, how has the rise of hybrid defensive roles changed IDP valuation?
Oh, it's been great. Before it was, I know that X player is going to just do this and only this, right? They have a specific
Yes.
role. But now, by having players that can do multiple things on the field, now you can take advantage of certain situations. Like for the longest time, uh, fantasy managers, when it comes to defensive backs, let's say in IDP, well, I only want the safeties that are playing closer to the line of the scrimmage because they're basically being treated like linebackers. So I can get linebacker points, but for a defensive back. And nobody even thought about talking about a cornerback. But now you've got slot cornerbacks that patrol basically the middle of the field, that they're becoming super valuable and have been for the previous seasons because quarterbacks on offense, they like to target their slot wide receivers a lot to help move the chains and get first downs. And so those slot cornerbacks are being targeted a lot. And so why is that helpful? It's because, well, now they get an opportunity to break up a pass, to make a tackle, and then those points start adding up. So the versatility that more defensive players have, the more opportunity you get to score fantasy points.
Nice. I want to talk a little bit about, content community and building fantasy in frames
Sure.
because this is so important. And I want to talk more about fantasy in frames in particular because it is important and it's a very important part of you. Can you tell me like how did all started in fantasy frames, and what do you want to tell me? Like, what's the role you have in fantasy frames?
Right. So, when I started the website, it was basically just, like I said, a couple articles a week. And then it was
Yes.
like, okay, a couple articles a week and a podcast. And then we just kept on growing. And fantasy and frames, what, I pride ourselves on is that there's like multiple types of fantasy we talk about. We talk about redraft, dynasty, IDP. We like to stay very balanced in the field of fantasy football because there's something for everybody that everybody loves, right? So
True.
let's appeal to as many people as we can, and let's get some knowledgeable people who have a passion for this stuff, who just love this stuff, uh, you know, uh, set on their way. Now, a lot of us out there in the content creator space, fantasy, is our hobby because we have our normal jobs during the day, and it takes a lot of work to really put in a quality product for fantasy football when you have other responsibilities outside of the fantasy football world. And one of the things that I've been supremely lucky in is having a supportive wife to support me during these adventures,
Love
and
that.
running fantasy frames. So I owe her, Melissa, I owe her everything for that. But my fellow content
Important.
creators, I mean, my fellow people at Fantasy and Frames, they're in similar situations, but they have a passion for fantasy football. They love talking this stuff. They like having the opportunity to do this. And one of the things that I make sure we foster at Fantasy and Frames is that family-like atmosphere when we're talking with one another, because at the end of the day, they know no matter what time of day, I'm always available. They know they can always give me a text message if they have a question as far as, hey, how do I study learning about this or that, or what's your process for this or that? I'll always answer. And everybody within the Fantasy and Frames family, we're all there to help each other out and to get better. And at the same time, we just love our interactions. Like you wouldn't believe how many times a random Friday at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., somebody will drop something in our private chat, and we will start laughing and we will have a good time. And the next thing you know, we're all talking, right? And it's like midnight, and it's like, where did the time go? We're just
Oh
having a
my
lot of fun.
God.
So that's the atmosphere we build, and that I'm proud of. Um, but we keep that going, and we keep on bringing more and more people on, and you know giving content creators who have never had an opportunity to create content is a very exciting thing for me because it gives me an opportunity to share what I've learned. And I'm not saying I know everything. I do not know everything. I'm learning every single day.
Does.
I think that's what everybody does, and so I'm no different from anybody else. I just happen to pick up things along the way that have helped us grow, and I
I
kind
love
of
it.
impart that to them. I am not a believer in micromanaging. I get basically a lot of really smart people who work really, really hard. I tell
Yes.
them, here's what I'm thinking. You all like this? Cool, great. I'm getting out of your way. You all have fun doing this. If you have any questions, I'm around, and let's make some magic. Um, so I love that aspect of running fantasy and frames. If I may, going back to the expo for a second in fantasy and
Of
frames,
course.
um, the greatest compliment I've ever gotten for fantasy and frames was it was 2021, um, and this couple, this husband and wife, came to our booth, and they were asking about fantasy football. The husband was, and I noticed the wife wasn't saying anything. So I'm like, "Oh, do you play fantasy football?" And she's like, "Not really." And I'm like, Is there anything you've ever wanted to know about fantasy football?" Well, yeah, I kind of was interested in learning about this. And so, like, everybody who was in our booth, we were engaging with her. We were having a good time. We were, having fun. And the following Monday, this individual, who has a rather large following, put out a tweet, and he specifically singled us out, saying, "Shout out to Fantasy and Frames. They were the only ones who gave real attention to my wife, because other places, when they heard that she doesn't play fantasy football, just completely ignored her."
Wow.
And so, uh, to get that compliment that we conduct ourselves with respect and we treat people with respect, that means more to me as far as what we've established than anything we could have possibly done going forward. And we hold ourselves to that level,
100%.
you know?
Yes. And you build a family, and that's
Yeah.
so important. You make your own family and you make everybody feels welcome and happy. And this is something that everybody wants to do and everybody is trying to achieve. And you achieved it, Jorge. That's amazing. That's such an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. But tell me, why fantasy in frames? Why the name fantasy in frames?
Oh, it's just, this is my marketing tool right here.
I know.
It's just the t-shirt with the glasses, like, all like,
Yes.
it just made too much. Like, it's funny, like, my wife came up with the name, and we were like having like a strategy session. Like, I was picking her brain as far as like, well, what do you think of this name? What do you think of that name? And she's like, well, look it online. Do they have people that are named like that? And every time
Yes.
I came across a name like that's taken. And I come up with like 20 names, and they all don't work. And this is so fitting. My wife just needs one opportunity, and she's like, how about you just call it Fantasy and Frames? And so it only took her one time to come up with a name, and it worked, and the rest is history. So here we are.
I love that. Someone is saying that he's gonna sign up for the live draft at the expo and and have me pick the players.
Nice.
No, no. I'm telling you from now, James. No, I'll do this. I'll pick the names. Don't
Well,
put me there.
now you got to
I
do
love
it,
it.
right? Now you got to do it. They've already said they're already going to do it. So, you know what I mean?
Um, so, Jorge, what editorial standards do you insist on for every piece of content you publish?
So whether it's me publishing content,
Yes,
as well as people at Fantasy and Frames, like, one of the things I tell them is no hot takes. I don't want hot takes. If you want hot takes,
nice.
go to Twitter. You'll find plenty. Um,
Yes,
you know, I want I want to hold myself and all of us to a standard where it's like, do your research, make sure you have a good argument, and stand by it. And as we all know in the fantasy football space, nobody gets things right 100% of the time. You
true.
know, it is what it is. That's just a fact of life, right? But I will say, I rather have more respect for somebody who does research, looks at the numbers, looks at the, whatever sources they're looking at to make their opinions and their recommendations. I'd rather you do that, have a logical argument, and get things wrong than say, oh, so and so is going to do well because they're awesome, and then they do well, and I'm like, all right, but like, how often are you going to, how often is that going to happen where you just say, oh, someone's going to do well because they're really, really good. Like that's not going to happen a lot of the time, you know? More often than not, somebody who has a process and is able to support their process is going to get it right. You know, everybody, um, I think there's a lot of people out there who refuse to admit that they're fallible and they don't make mistakes. And
Yes,
that's just not the case. You know, and at the end of the day, what I believe separates fantasy and frames from every place else is that on all our shows, on all our articles, we not only talk about, you know, why we're, you know, the players that we're recommending, we really dive deep into like, this is the why, because you have the supportive information. And, you know, there's a misconception in the fantasy space where it's like people just want to be told what to do and tell me who to play and who not to. And I don't really believe that's true. I think you insult somebody's intelligence by not telling them the why behind something because, you know, we have brains, we know how to use them. So show,
true.
you know, we like to show people more respect than that, and you really give the information and explain why.
I love that, Jorge. I love that you put that out there because, like you said, there's a lot of people that they put a lot of stuff out there, but they don't do the research, and they don't know how to do the research per
Right.
se. What can you say to people that they are using AI nowadays and they're not doing their research properly, and they're relying more on AI?
So AI has its place. Like if you want to like, hey, I'm thinking about doing something here, writing about this, but I don't know what's a good outline or a framework, or I'm thinking about, you know, developing this or that. Like what's a good framework to make things like how should I craft a tweet on Twitter? How should I, you know, do X, Y, and Z? That's very like developing the structure. I think that's perfectly fine. The issue you run into is that okay, when you're reading a piece of AI content, like you can tell that it's AI because it's you know there's no again the lack of why people like it's very focused on just telling people information, not explaining information,
Yes.
and that's where you can really spot you know the AI content. And you know it's unfortunate. A lot of good people have lost their jobs when it comes to AI, especially in
Yeah.
the fantasy football space. But I have more faith that they'll bounce back and find success down the road than I am people really trusting AI for their content. You know, it takes away from the person, and that's the thing that really matters. To be honest with you, there are so many content creators out there, and I have respect for every single one of them that does the research, you know, and really puts out good, actionable advice. But at the end of the day, we're not just people who talk about stats, and we're not just people who talk about film. We're not just we're people. You know,
True.
our mission is to not only give you good information, but hey,
Connection.
did you have fun watching the show? Do you
True.
get along with the personalities? You know, we're trying to sell ourselves also, and I think places that you know you see the interaction amongst you know their fellow hosts and with the you know the YouTube chats, for example, you know, like you all do a great job at, like that's what makes content creators valuable, and AI will never be able to replicate that.
Never. How do you balance free content with premium offerings without alienating fans?
So we don't have any uh, paywalls.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a believer in paywalls for content. I will say that we are developing tools that are hoping to go live this fall. Um, that's where I'd be like, okay, well, a lot of people put a lot of effort and expertise into crafting a
True.
tool. Um, I think there is validity in having a paywall up for that. If it's something that is super helpful, not only for the fantasy manager, but also helpful from things from a business aspect. You know, I think that's a fair way to go about it. But as far as
Yes.
like waivers and starts and sits and you know just you know other you know content, no, we're never going to put that behind a paywall because you know people sometimes they see a paywall and they're like, I'll just go someplace else. And I want
Yeah.
them to realize when they come to Fantasy and Frames, like you're not getting a drop off in quality just because it's free. Like you're we're doing this because we love it and we want to make sure that you're having a good time enjoying it and that you're getting something out of it that helps you win.
But at the same time, you need to get a revenue as well, and you need to pay your writers,
Oh yeah,
right?
it's one of those things where I am very clear as far as like setting expectations. Like, you know, I can afford this, I can offer this, I can offer that. You know, I
Yes,
can't afford this, I can't offer that. And you have to be really transparent with people when it comes to this stuff. And for some people, they're like, I need, X, Y, and Z, and I'll tell them I cannot afford that. I'm sorry. And so I can do this, but I can't do that. And at the end of the day, it's up to that individual to decide, okay, well, that's okay, cool. And there are other people who are like, I'm sorry, I can't. Nothing I can do about that. All I can be is transparent with what I can do and what I can't do. I will
yes,
say that anybody who puts in the time uh, and the consistency to make quality content, I'll just put it like this: I take care of my people, and I make sure
I
that they're
love that.
taken care of. So, one
Of
way or the
course.
other, they're taken care of, and I pride myself on that.
That's such an amazing thing to do as well. I want to talk a little bit about what happened this year with football and the shock that two teams that they're not supposed to be playing at the end of the game, they were playing. What what is your opinion on like New England playing at football this year? And did you figure out from the beginning that they going to make it till the end?
No, I first of all, kudos to both of those teams for making the Super Bowl. In regards to New England, did I expect them to make it to the Super Bowl? Absolutely not. Um, that being the case, am I, am I completely surprised by it? No, because at the end of the day, it's about, I believe you value organizations by the culture and the standards they hold themselves to. And you see, whenever you're listening to a press conference or you're watching like a behind the scenes video with the Patriots, and you have Mike Vrabel and his message to everybody and how he holds everybody accountable, but he makes it a team, environment. I thought that was very impressive and very respectable. And I don't know if you know this, but like after the Super Bowl was over, um, he was shaking the hands of every single player as they were going back into the locker room after the game. Keep your head up. Another year we'll get this right. We're going to figure this out. And he really, he didn't have to do that. He doesn't have to do a lot of the things. Like one of the things at his press conference is there is a long-standing woman reporter for I forget what newspaper it was, but every press conference, he always gives her the first question because he understands that women in sports do not get the opportunities that men in sports do. So he was always like, she's always going to get the first question. So the tone that he establishes as far as respect goes in
I love
everything
it.
he does with the organization, I was not surprised that he was able to get his players to play at the level they did.
So I want to ask you something because I saw after Seahawk and Patriots Super Bowl play, I saw something in the news not a long time ago. I'm not sure how like good this news is, but I want to ask you that question. Maybe you can put the points on there for me. So the officials were kicked out of the game, like all the refs they were like they kicked them out and they were told that they did a lot of bad judgment at the Super Bowl. How this news is reliable or true in your opinion?
Well, so this is the first I heard about it. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I don't know. I just heard it like today. I just saw some news about it. But I'm not sure if it's true or not.
people will find a way to complain about everything. So I try not to put too much stock into something like that. If there were a lot of bad calls on the officiating side, you know, that's unfortunate, but stuff happens. I'm more of a proponent of like it doesn't take one bad call to ruin a game. Potentially,
Yeah.
there are circumstances, and I know Denver Broncos fans don't want to hear that right now. There are circumstances, but there are plenty of opportunities for both teams to make enough plays to overcome bad officiating. Um, So I think people like to get hung up on like the one play that costs them the game. It's like it wasn't one play; it was several plays throughout the game. So
Yes, I agree.
as far as what you're bringing up with officials, like that doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me either. Um, Talking about, official disagreement and a lot of stuff. Um, I'm sure you have a lot of disagreement publicly, especially that you have, a website per se, as well about fantasy football and you have contributors and such. So, how do you handle disagreements publicly? And when they clash, like when all contributors clash on a recommendation or they clash on something that you might post that they don't agree with. How do you handle all of this?
Oh, I mean, there at the end of the day, it all comes down to treating people with respect.
Yes.
First and foremost, like the trolls who will like insult you or do this and that, like I don't even bother. Somebody who wants to come at me with a disagreement on a take, I'll always be like, well, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on that? Okay, cool. I understand
Yes.
that, but here's my opinion. Um, the second people start to go down like a nasty path of just being angry and belligerent, like I don't got time for that. Like I try to avoid the drama as much as possible. A lot of people say out there, I'll mute somebody if they're being rude or they're being. I don't have time for that. I just block. I don't have time for you. I don't like if you're going to be disrespectful, like and not have a civil argument. I don't need you on my timeline. So it is. I curate my timeline well, but I will always be up for having discussions and debates with somebody, and either they convince me, I convince them,
Yes.
or it's a standstill. At the end of the day, I always make sure I end a conversation with like, this has been fun. Thank you very much. I appreciate your feedback. And kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have women in fantasy frames or
Oh yeah.
it's only men?
No, 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 no. We one of the things that has been very important has been the diversity at Fantasy and Frames.
I love this. Yeah.
So for example, Stacy Perez, she was
Oh,
one of our
I love
newest.
Stacy.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
fantastic. We she came on in 23. Again, one of those individuals who entered the fantasy space with no experience, and next thing one of the things I thought to myself is like she needs to be in the forefront. She needs to be given this opportunity to host a podcast. So she became a podcast host. She was doing player profiles. She was doing research. She was networking. Next thing you know, she's on Sirius XM with Bob Harris regularly. She's developed a name for herself in the space.
Yes.
Like she's writing for other platforms. Like she's doing so much. She's organizing our annual women's best ball tournament, which starts in March. So just
I got the link.
nice, good, 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 good.
But
Um,
I tell her I cannot do. I really can't do it, especially that I'm trying to finish my PhD, so it's a lot of juggling. But I don't know. Maybe one day she's
come
like,
on.
I'm gonna always poke you, Carla. I love Stacy so much.
Uh,
I really can't. It's a lot.
you know, so she's been influential. We had Erica Brown was with us
Yes,
for a while. Just fantastic content out of
I
her.
love Eric too. Yeah,
Erica, then we have Charlene Erickson who joined us last year. She's another
nice.
one who, you know, maybe not that much experience as a content creator, came on and was on our waiver wire show last year. So it's very important, to be inclusive and to have as many people from different backgrounds as possible. It's important to find out what they enjoy doing, you know, um, and once you figure that out, people, regardless, male, female, like you figure out what they enjoy and you put them in
Yes,
positions to be successful, they're going to have fun. And at the end of the day, don't get me wrong, like we have fun, but we put in work. You know what I mean?
yes.
It is work on work on work. But if you're finding the work fun, then it doesn't feel like work. Does that make sense?
It doesn't feel 100%. I agree with you 100%. So I want to ask you hypothetical questions and
Sure.
thought experiments.
Yeah.
If you could redesign fantasy scoring for perfect decision making clarity, what's one rule you would change?
Okay. So this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I
That's your opinion.
I do not like PPR. I do not like half PPR. I am very much a non PPR old school. Like what you see on the field is what you get. If they catch the pass, that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. If they get positive yardage, good. That makes sense. That correlates to fantasy points. So I would definitely that would be my perfect. Like I'm currently writing an article, my ode to non PPR, because I will always like that scoring. I understand PPR and half PPR are the current standard. Doesn't mean it's my favorite. It's just you understand your audience.
Yes.
That's my perfect scoring there, non PPR.
If fantasy in frames were a lab, what experiment would you run next season?
So going with our tools that we're in the process of developing, that's a big experiment to see. Okay, does the tool work? Good. All right. Does it give consistent information? Good. One of the things in the sciences that's really important is repeatability. So it's one of those things where are we sticking to our process? If something's working, like I'm a big believer of like if it's not broke, don't fix it. You
Don't
know,
fix it.
there's nothing to fix, right? It's working. So as
Agree.
long as the writers and the content creators here are being consistent year in and year out, that's the experiment to see like where that happens. Because I know as long as that is happening, success and being able to help fantasy managers. Because at the end of the day, it's like we're not just in it for ourselves. Like in fact,
True.
that's a secondary. Like if we get exposure, if we get notoriety or success or fame, that to me that doesn't matter. If it's just helping one person have fun, play fantasy, or have success, that is what it's about. It's about helping other people have fun and have success.
I love this. This question is a little tricky. If
Okay.
you could merge two fantasy formats, which would you combine and what would the scoring look like?
Oh, this is easy. It's offense and IDP, 100%. That like I Carla, you want to hear a funny story? I have
Sure.
always played in IDP league, combo IDP leagues. It wasn't until 2017 that somebody invited me to a fantasy football league that did not have IDP, and they had defense special teams. And I'm like, what is this? Where are the IDP players? Oh, that's not a popular format, Jorge. We don't put IDP here. I'm like, you don't? Like, what is defense special teams? What the heck is this? What am I supposed to do with this? So for me, I grew up and I started out like playing combo leagues, and so that would be the the two areas I would meld together. It would be PPR for this very reason because Sleeper has a default scoring setting which is called IDP 123 that was created by a gentleman by the name of Jordan Rains, and that's kind of with Sleeper being the default fantasy football app that's probably the most popular one out there. Using their default settings with a PPR, they just go hand in hand. So those would be the two formats I would blend together, and then the scoring as well.
I love it. So I want to say hi to Wendy. She just popped in as well to say hi to both of us.
Love
I love
Wendy.
everybody in the chat area. Thank you so much for coming, you guys. It's such an amazing night talking to Jorge tonight. So let's talk about player evaluation and scoring. Um, what a film detail most often changes your projection for a player?
So it really comes down to like how well do they perform at a certain situation. So I
Yes.
always like to look. So people, have differing opinions on which matters more, film or analytics or film. Me personally, there's a lot of film out there, but for me, I like filtering out, looking at the numbers first and seeing what's impressive, what's not impressive. So then when I see something in a player that's impressive, it's like, okay, I should pay attention to what this player is doing in the on the film, in the film. So I'll go back and I'll look, and I'll be like, oh my god, when he's, when a wide receiver is playing versus man coverage and he's having a lot of success, okay, well, that tells me that person is going to be reliable in any situation. When I see a player like a Luther Burden this past year, rookie from Missouri playing for the Chicago Bears, I know, okay, he may catch the ball just 5 yards down the field, but he then is able to turn that into a 20-yard gain because he's able to get a lot of yards after the catch. So, that's something that translates. It's one of those things where numbers can only tell you a part of the story, but then you look at the film situation and you're like, something's not adding up. Like,
Yeah.
is this a scenario where they were just at the right time, space, and place, and things worked out for them, or is there something that's a consistently happening occurrence, that you can back up with the numbers?
Nice. So Wendy is asking, how's the little man?
So the little man is doing great, Wendy. I made the mistake today when I was driving home from picking him up at the babysitter's, thinking that he would love going through the car wash. He did not. So traumatized my 1.5-year old by going through the car wash. That was my day. So, but other than that, he's doing fantastic. Thank you for asking.
Do not take him again.
Ever,
Go car
ever,
wash.
ever again. No, no, no. Hmm.
I just want to say sorry again. A lot of people are saying I'm being frozen. I don't know why. I'm showing up here that everything is fine from my side. So I want to apologize for everybody, you guys. Let's continue, Jorge, with some of the questions. How do you incorporate the opponent's strength into weekly start set advice?
So this is where thinking about things from the defensive side of the ball with IDP comes into play, because it's one
Yes.
thing to just look at the opponent's strength. It's also very important to look at the weaknesses that the defense is having. You know, so at the end of the day, for the offensive side of the ball, it's about opportunity. It's about volume. You could have a very inefficient player at running back or at wide receiver, but if they're the number one running back and they're the number one wide receiver, you got to show them some respect, because they're the ones who are going to get the opportunities first and foremost and more consistently. So you definitely want to pay attention to that aspect, but at the same time, if you have a really, efficient running back and a really efficient wide receiver, but they're facing a defense that has been giving up a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns and a lot of catches to certain positions on offense, well, then I want to take advantage of that too. So there are
Right.
two ways to look at it. And so I think it's really important to emphasize the importance of how much defense plays a role in playing offense on fantasy football.
So scouting is coming soon. What's one scouting habit you would recommend every fantasy manager to adopt?
You know, I again, it comes back to that film versus analytical debate.
Yeah,
And look, do both. Like, do yourself a favor, while at the same time, don't pretend. Don't pretend that you know something that you don't. If you know one thing better than the other, then lean into that, and preface what you're saying by saying, "Hey, from an analytical perspective, from a film perspective, don't be afraid to, say, that you don't know something." So many people are like, so like, I can't admit that I'm wrong. I can't admit that I don't know anything. Be transparent, because people can,
agree.
they can sense you being genuine and you being fake. So that's the important thing in terms of that aspect. But as far as the advice to give people,
Yeah,
be consistent with how you're doing things. If you're going to say in film, this player is really good at this, therefore, I'm going to hold other players to the same standard. Well, then hold them to the same standard. If you're going to say, this metric between here and here is good and here is bad, well, then hold everybody else to that same standard. And just be consistent with your analysis and your research, and more often than not, that's going to pay dividends.
I agree. Jorge, what's a legacy do you want fantasy and frames to leave in the fantasy community?
That you learned something and you had fun hanging out with us. At the end of the day, we want you to win championships. We want you to have success. But a lot of other places, everybody says the same thing. At the end of the day, if we made your lives more fun, more entertaining, and you got something out of it that made you have some fun playing fantasy football, that's all I could ever ask for.
What's the next big milestone you're building toward?
So right now we have coming this July will be our 9th year. So
Congratulations.
thank you. So very excited about that. Then of course once that happens, it's getting to 10 years. That's going to be a huge milestone. But
It
you know
is?
I measure the milestones at the end of every year, and it's like, have we been consistent year round? Do we stay true to who we are? And as long as we're doing that, then we're checking off milestones left and right. But for me, getting to 9 years is obviously important. But then getting to year 10, yeah, that is. I may have to switch the logo to people can now have contact lenses in, and so
Are we gonna have a party at
oh,
the expo at the
that
10th year?
that you better believe that is going to happen year 10.
Listen, I do a lot of great events, so hit me up. I'll
Okay.
figure things out for you. That's gonna be awesome. 10, almost 10 years,
Yeah.
almost 10 years. And you're building a great, and amazing, a legacy for yourself and for everybody who works with you. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Um, Jorge, if you could bottle one piece of your process and sell it, what would it be and why?
Whatever advice you give in terms of the process goes, again, be consistent with it. You know,
Yes,
people, they have a process and then something goes wrong and they get it wrong and they're immediately, oh my God, I got to start all over. I got to figure something out. And I'm like, well, were you really that far off, or did things just not, or were you really far off? I think that's important, to be consistent with your process and have faith in your abilities, and be okay with being wrong, as long as
true.
you gave it your best and you did your best. Because everyone's going to get stuff wrong. Everybody wants to project that they never make a mistake, and that's not true. As long as you can say, well, here is my thought process on X, Y, and Z, and ultimately this is what happened. People will respect you going step by step explaining your process, because then they're going to be like, well, yeah, that makes sense, and
Yeah,
that makes sense too, and this person's taking the time to explain this to me, so I'm going to trust them because they know what they're talking about, and they backed it up, and they're showing me the respect by giving me the time of day to explain this to me, and to really, making me feel important. And if we're doing that, then we're doing something right.
I love I love that answer. Um, what one question you wish interviewers ask you more often?
Are these really prescription glasses, or do I just wear these for cosmetic reasons? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Although that probably would be a good question to ask. I don't know. That is a great question. You know, I think the question I think I would enjoy answering the most is it still fun? Is what you do 9 years into it, do you still find it fun and enjoying? Because it's a grind. Like I said, people at Fantasy and Frames, we're here for fun. We have our careers outside of this, but
True.
we also hold ourselves to the standard, and that is, this is work. Like, let's not just sugarcoat it. Like, you're not just here having a good time, woo, and then you don't
To
put in, like,
dance, yeah.
yeah, like, no, 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 no. Like, you put in work, but as long as you find the work fun, yeah, that's important. And going on 9 years almost to this day, I have more and more fun each and every year.
I love that. How do you want listeners to act differently after hearing this episode?
Well, giving us a follow on social media would be great. Giving us a subscribe on our YouTube, checking, interacting with us in our live streams is great, because we want to interact with you all as well. You
True.
all are the reason why we're doing this, is because we want to help you all out. And even if it was somebody in one of our shows last week, it was pretty funny. They said they put in the chat as we're talking about fantasy football. They said, "Hey, you guys like Wendy's? Like, is in the restaurant?" And I stopped the show and I put his comment on screen. And I'm like, I love Wendy's. In fact, I'm thinking about Wendy's now. It's making me want to pause the podcast, go to Wendy's, and then come back and continue the show. Like, I don't care what it is. I will have fun with it. And if I'm having fun, chances are y'all are having fun. So that did I answer that question? I don't even know. I'm actually thinking about Wendy's right now that I just brought that
Me
up. So,
too. Like, I
yeah.
want to go to Wendy's right now.
But
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, this is really important. Like interactions with people and having people around. I agree with you. It makes the like the live show, it makes it more alive.
yeah,
And that's part of we do what we do. Jorge, I cannot thank you enough. Like it's we're over an hour, but I have one more question to ask
sure.
that I do ask all my guests before they leave. And this question is, if you ever had a secret, maybe you never spoke of, or maybe something that you did at an early age and you never shared it with anybody, and you want to share it on the Game Changers tonight.
Okay, so um, this is going to be interesting, and this has nothing to do with football. It is a core memory for me. So
Yeah, it
my
doesn't
my
have to.
my uncle, who I was named after, um, was a priest, and he was visiting for the holidays for Christmas, and we were all getting ready to go to church one night, and it's the middle of the day, and my parents are at work, and so he's looking after me. And I was and to this day am a big pro wrestling fan. Like over
Yes.
here, I have wrestling toys from the '90s. Here, I my room is like an entire room of like geeky, nerdy things. And I had asked for Christmas one year for a wrestling ring for my figures, and so I'm like going around the house trying to figure out where the presents are. And I go into my uncle's room and I look under his bed, and I find it. I find the gift that I was wanting for Christmas.
Oh,
Um, but then I turn around and he's right there. And then immediately I was like, wait a second. He's a priest. If I confess to him, he can't tell my parents because it's between him, me, and God. Hey, Tio Jorge, will you not tell my mom that I found my present? Um, so yeah, that's probably my answer to that question. That is a secret that I have not told publicly. Sorry, mom.
I
Um,
love it.
but there you go. That's probably one of my most fun ones, if not the biggest one there.
Everybody's telling us secrets right now. Even James is telling a secret. I can't with you, James. I love that. I love that. So, Jorge, before I end this, I wrap up and end this episode. I wanted to tell everybody the best way to connect with you online, where they can follow your work, and please tell them about your podcast, everything that you want to share that might help your followers as well when they listen to this episode to go and contact you.
Absolutely. So you can reach out to me at Jorge B. Edwards. You can, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram or TikTok or you name it, I'm on it. If you are not a big social media person and you enjoy conversing by email, you can email me at jorge@fantasyandframes.com. But you know what? I'd rather you all follow Fantasy and Frames. We're a big family there. We love doing what we do. Fantasyandframes.com. You can check out all of our articles and our rankings. All of them have been updated. They're live. We have articles coming out for content for, the NFL draft for all the prospects. We have Fantasy Football 101 articles where we teach you the basics if you're new to fantasy football, as well as, head over to our YouTube page. We have shows. We have three main podcasts. One's called Dynasty 365, which covers Dynasty fantasy football. We have our IDP podcast called Shoot the Gap. And then we have our redraft show called Fourth and Frames, and those are our
Nice.
core podcasts there that you can find at the whether wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as over on our YouTube channel. And yeah, that those are probably the main areas there. If you ever follow somebody or you find somebody who we put out an article for and we tag them, give them a follow too, because they're working hard behind the scenes and making sure that they're giving you the best information possible. So if you see Fantasy and Frames in the bio of somebody, I guarantee you it's definitely worth it to give them a follow.
And we cannot wait to see each other at the expo
Absolutely.
and go and find Fantasy and Frames at the expo as well. And I cannot wait to see you and to meet your wife,
Thank you.
Jorge, this year. It's going to be really amazing. I cannot thank you enough for being here tonight. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Game Changers. If today's conversation gave you a fresh perspective on fantasy football or the game of life, do me a favor, drop a comment with your biggest takeaway. Mark your calendar and join me next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Tom Phillips for more game-changing conversations. Big thank you for JC for his behind-the-scene magic and the powerhouse team at TSA for making this platform possible. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a review, and follow us on social media. Until next time, keep challenging the game and making your mark. This is Carla and Jorge signing off. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Good night. Bye.